What is up, fellow sickos? I am Dan Valley coming at you with another 2024-2025 NBA look ahead. We are on to the Milwaukee Bucks, which means it's time to talk to the homie Ty Windish, who covers the Bucks fantastically, I might add, over at the Eurostep podcast. Follow him on Twitter at Ty Windish. That's at TIWINDISCH. The link to that will be in the podcast and YouTube description, as well as on screen if you are watching on YouTube. We're going to get into all things Bucks. It's a lot of fun. Make sure you go follow the Eurostep podcast. That's at Eurostep podcast at GYROSTEP They do a great job over there of covering not just the Bucks, but other sports within the region. Excited to talk with Ty as we are every year. So let's get into what is one of the more, and I mean this, I know I use this word a lot, but it's one of the more fascinating teams in the league heading into next season when you look at the timeline that they are facing. So here we go. Milwaukee Bucks talk with Ty. And if you haven't already, or even if you have, subscribe across all platforms. I don't know what other podcast really covering every single team this in depth every single year with their own dedicated look ahead podcast. So YouTube, Spotify, Apple, the whole nine, if you're new around these parts. And if you're not new, share these episodes, shout us out on Twitter, in the comments, like the video, share the videos, anything you can do to continue to help us grow the community. That includes joining the Discord. Link to that's the podcast and YouTube description. Okay, that's enough out of me for real this time. Let's get to talking Milwaukee Bucks with Ty Windish of the Eurostep podcast. Ty, welcome back. It's a look ahead season. It's the Bucks. We had to bring on you. Did you know, because I keep this logged, this is your fourth year coming back on HardwoodKnocks for the look ahead. We have there's very few, because I think this is only the sixth year, maybe the fifth that we've done it. So we have a couple people that have made it the half decade route, but you're like right there. You might even, I feel you've definitely been on the pod more than five times. This is your fourth look ahead. How does that feel to know that?
It feels great. I feel very old. I'm turning 30 next year. So that's
You're
like a whole thing that I'm grappling. I know. Well, you know what's doing it for me is I'm around the same age as Giannis. So I think as Giannis starts to get to like that 32, and he already gets it some because, the athleticism, but people are like, oh, I think he's aging out of it, right? I can tell that's going to be brutal for me. That's going to be really tough for me. And I remember being between him and Jabari, and I thought, oh, it'll be cool to track Jabari's career and, see it. And that obviously, unfortunately, didn't take very long. But otherwise, I feel good about it outside of the age question of it all and how long I've been doing this damn thing.
You're still a baby. I'm 35, and that's been like a mystery around these parts for some reason. And people either think I'm much younger or way older. It's never like, he must be 33 or 35 or something. I will say, covering the league at 35 and like having to say like, oh, so-and-so is like turning 31. Like, I feel like such a fucking hypocrite. Like, it's just like, why?
Yeah.
Like, they're past their prime now because they're in their 30s.
Yeah, it's like that great meme of like he's defying all logic, heroically playing at 34 years old. It's just like, oh no.
But the Bucks, though,
yeah,
brought you on to discuss these Milwaukee Bucks. I want to start here. What are your biggest takeaways from, I mean, just like everything that happened with the way that last season unfolded and the discourse and the perception of the Bucks that's kind of trickled out after that? Like, what do you just make of it all as we're heading into this new season?
Yeah, it was clearly a pretty unmitigated disaster. But the funny part about that is the Bucks' unmitigated disaster scenario had them like, I think, a game out of the 2 seed, and they were still ultimately the 3 seed. So one of my takeaways, and we just did a pod with Milwaukee Journal Sentinel writer Jim Ozarski, who's great. And his thing was like, I feel like people just don't really realize they're really good still throughout everything that's happened. So I think that's my takeaway. I think they messed up a lot. Clearly the coaching hire went about as poorly as possible. The Dame trade, I don't think was a bad trade by any means. That's, of course, like a bit of a contentious thing somewhere, mostly because Portland happened to send Drew to Boston versus anywhere else. But I think the way it happened was the worst way for it to happen, meaning they built a whole team for Drew Holiday at the point guard, and then 3 days before camp with a new head coach, go ahead and get Dame. He's going through all his personal things and then injuries as well, which is kind of inescapable for an older team. But Giannis goes down in March, I think, or May or whatever, April. I think it was April, and then doesn't play again. That's obviously going to doom your season almost no matter what. But it's like through all of that, they've kind of stuck together. They didn't have like an offseason implosion. Nobody asked out. They mostly kept their core together from last year and upgraded a few veterans. So I think actually, as disappointing as it is whenever you lose a prime Giannis season and the first Giannis and Dame season, I do think given some precedent for some other teams that took a year to come together, overall, it's hard to not feel kind of good, right? Like it was all a disaster. I don't feel good. I didn't feel good at any point during that season. But like now in the offseason, looking at how they did since then, it's kind of like they went through a lot. A lot of it was horrible. But I think a lot of it will help them going forward outside of just being a year older, these guys, and like medical stuff that maybe gets better, maybe doesn't. I think mostly it will, but you can never really know. But it was certainly, they took their lumps. That's for sure.
The thing I always come back to with them too is, I mean, you look at how you mentioned the place in the standings, but their top 4 guys are on the court. They blasted opponents. It was like over 16 points per 100 possessions. And they also played more than you thought together relative to just like, their season felt very stop and start. I think a lot of that had to do with the transition from Adrian Griffin to Doc Rivers. We do have another offseason though, where it seems like they've done good work on the margins. And we said that last year. And as you mentioned, though, we did record before the Damian Lillard trade went down at the time. They built their team like in the vein of Drew Holiday is going to be our starting point guard. Now they know that Damian Lillard is going to be, they were able to go through the offseason with it. Do you think that, because we're definitely guilty of it on this podcast, go back and listen to what we said about Phoenix's offseason last year with the minimum signing. We do tend to over romanticize like the impact these minimum guys have. But do you think that between DeLon Wright, Gary Trent Jr., who is not your typical minimum signing, let's make that clear, and even Taurean Prince, who Lakers fans will claim is like worse than Dalton Connect, who hasn't played an NBA game yet, do you think that's given the Bucks like enough perimeter optionality to feel good about their overall depth relative to last season?
Hopefully no more death. They kind of did die on the vine last year. Yeah, I do. I really don't think any of the 3, certainly not Trent, but even the other 2 to me, I think Wright is the closest. None of those guys to me as a general NBA guy, and maybe this is Bucks bias speaking, but I would have thought maybe Wright could be attainable on a vet min. Going into this offseason, I put Taurean Prince on my fine player, makes sense as a fit. I don't think they could get him for a vet min, and same for Prince. And some guys always get squeezed, but I really did not expect at least those 2 of the 3 to be vet minimum players. Like I think they did abnormally well. I think some of it was above their control, right? Like the way the CBA has evolved and changed and teams have reacted to it. There just aren't as many salary slots in free agency. So if you're not getting extended or signed and traded, I suppose you're just kind of out of luck. So I'm still a little surprised that Prince shook loose for the Lakers. Like I know the whole thing, and we don't have to do a Lakers thing, but some guys opted into vet minimum player options and it just messed up their whole summer. That seems like kind of wild to happen for such a low stakes things to have occurred, but I think it worked out for the Bucks just fine. And obviously the Trent thing, Toronto just going a different direction, still insane to me that he couldn't have found anything more. But I think the other part of this too is an unforeseen consequence of they lowered the taxpayer mid-level. So I think a lot of these guys like Trent, it's like, okay, do I want about $3 million to play in Milwaukee for a contender, start next to my old friend Damian Lillard with a Giannis team, or was it like $5-ish million to go? Yeah. I don't know what other tax team, right? You could, there's some good options out there, I'm sure, but some teams don't even spend those things anyway. So I think I do feel really good about their optionality. It was funny the order in which the signings happened, because the first one is DeLon Wright, and I was like, okay, good backup point guard. If he's got to be the starter though next to Dame, you don't love that. And then they get Prince. It's like, okay, Prince could probably start. He started for the Lakers. I know that their fans are very underwhelmed with him, but we know what he does, right? He shoots threes at a solid level, a good clip and a solid rate of making them, and is like a movable defensive player. Guarded a lot of good players defensively above his station, but we're talking about Malik Beasley last year. So the Bucks can live with that. And then it was Trent. It was like, okay, that answers the other questions and makes it all look a lot better. So yeah, I think they did really well, all things considered. I think they've retained a lot of core players. And I mean, I still think the reaction has been almost a little too muted on Gary Trent. I think some people have acknowledged it well. That to me, that's crazy. He's like a 17 point per game scorer on incredible efficiency, has racked up steals. He's not a defensive ace. Like we wanted like a Dylan Brooks kind of player to complement Dame, but I don't think beggars can be choosers. And I think just pure talent alone, I think their starting 5 is going to be pretty ridiculous next season when those 5 guys are all out there.
Yeah, and I think also the thing with Trent is that he'll make a lot of gambles on defense, but like for the Bucks, who I think they ended up finishing 30th in forcing turnovers last year, to have him, and then if you can put Giannis in like his best role, like this team might be able to fuck some shit up. defensively that can
Yeah.
go on the court. I'm not saying Trent is like a very good defender, but I think he's serviceable enough. And if you just want, like, he could be a steals merchant, that's fine. I was going to ask
Yeah.
you, and it seems like you already answered it though. Taurean Prince feels like he feels more of an archetypal need, but I do feel like DeLon Wright is better for what their biggest defensive weakness was last year. If you had to guess on who winds up being more important to this team, does the Trent signing kind of shift it all the way? Well, it's obviously Taurean Prince now, or is there a chance that it might be DeLon Wright?
There's still a chance. I think if his defense holds up, and if for him his shooting has varied a lot, I don't even know how much it matters because teams are going to want him to shoot. We'll see. Rohan, my co-host Rohan Kadi, thinks he could really close. Like, he's big on this idea of just having that defensive-minded guard to play alongside Dame, and I think there's a lot of reason to think that is true. I think the reason it could be him, and a lot of this depends too on like, what does this version of Gary Trent Jr. look like? How much can he buy in a defense? How much can he do on that end? Because if it's anywhere close defensively between him and Wright, then Wright's probably not closing very often. I think they would prefer to go bigger, but maybe not. It all depends if Brook Lopez can stay in or not. But I think Prince, I think Wright could. There's more variables. I think in more scenarios, it's probably Prince because the Bucks have always, since PJ Tucker left, needed that new guy to enable Giannis at the 5. And so the question becomes like, can Prince and Middleton, like, can they both be 3.5s to add up to 7 is what I've put out there, because maybe neither of them is your traditional stretch 4, but can they both be stretch 3.5s? Maybe, we'll see. But I think that player is really important. If Prince can contribute to that lineup, it'll be him. If not, then I could see it being Wright as well, but it's probably less likely now with Trent, but not impossible.
I get to dictate so much of how these episodes go that I wanted to include this question to start things off this year. What is the biggest storyline you'll be monitoring for this team throughout this coming season?
Health first, but I'm not even going to talk about it because it's not fun. But obviously that's going to be the number one. The most fun one, and the one that was worth talking about, it's probably just like Dame, Khris, and Giannis together. And you mentioned the Bucks were really good when those three played together. And like a really good to the point of you'd think like, okay, they're probably a contender anyway. But some of the buzz is like, it should be better. And I think it can be better. I mean, I think if you watch, I think you would agree. And a lot of people have, like, they weren't all that cohesive at all, especially the fabled Dame Giannis pick and roll. They didn't really get good at it. The Dame Brook pick and roll was better, and Khris Giannis actions were better because they've been doing it for a decade. No real surprise there. But all of the focus since Doc really came in was, we need to get this played down. Like, that's their thing. I think that can separate them from every other team in the league is you could look at other teams are deeper, certainly Boston. Maybe you can say other teams have more top end talent. I don't think there is another action, maybe outside of Denver, that could be as devastating singularly as a Dame Giannis pick and roll. Like, I think it should be as unguardable as anything that exists, especially given they have the personnel around it, right? Gary Trent on one wing, Khris Middleton on the other, whether you have another guard, a big, whoever, someone in the dunker spot, it's pretty unguardable. It should be totally impossible to stop. I mean, their gravity totally shifted to teams doubling Dame around half court, which Giannis has never seen anything like this before. The floor totally shifted. So really those two, but I'll throw in Khris as well. I think they're going to do some with Khris. He's not always just going to be spacing, right? He's a really good player. But like those three being even better together, I think that's what, whether the regular season numbers are the same, better, a little worse in terms of their on-court efficiency. If they're going to win a title, it's because a close game in the last 5 minutes, they can just say, we're going to get a really good look every single time. Like, we're going to score every time. We'll make the stops. Brook and Giannis and Trent and whoever will figure that out. But we can just be totally unguardable and get a great shot every time and just win. So that's what I think their biggest storyline is can those two go from we made it work because we're so good to, okay, we're actually on all cylinders and no one can guard this action at all anymore. I think that's going to be number one for me.
Is there like anything that you view that accounts for why, when you look at Damian Lillard's overall fit, that it felt like there were really long pockets of time where there wasn't enough Dame and Giannis actions? Was it just they were using Dame to open up the Middleton and Giannis two-man game too much, and it's more about maybe Middleton finding his comfort level within that dynamic? Because we did see it at points last year, like the Dame and Giannis stuff can be devastating, and it should be devastating. Yeah. And I know, like, it feels like the volume of it, just watching, because I don't have the data on like how many ball screens each of them are setting for each other, but it feels like it waxed and waned Would that be
It
like
did.
accurate, the usage of it?
Yeah, it did. I think a lot of it was the coaching change. I think Doc wanted to do it a lot more, but pretty soon after he was taken over, like I think part of it was they do want to have one of Dame or Giannis out there all the time, which obviously doesn't preclude you from running a lot of actions with them together, but they weren't like staggering them together, which I think makes sense. I think that's how they should play. I don't think you want to have two top 75 all-time guys and then have a lot of minutes per game where neither of them are out there. But so that takes down the opportunity a little bit. I think the Adrian Griffin Bucks did it less, and they probably waxed and waned more. And then the Doc Rivers Bucks, frankly, just had very little time with the core players together, especially Dame and Giannis. I think they're going to do it a lot more going forward, at least I hope. I also think part of it was accommodating Khris. Part of it was like in the short term, like it looked a lot better when Khris was running with Giannis and when Dame was running with Brook, partially because Dame is used to having the ball a lot, but more so, Giannis is just not a great screener. It's come and it's gone. And I think like he did it enough in 21 when he screened for Khris a lot and they won a title with it. It's not what he wants to do, right? Like necessarily. He wants to have the ball, create. He actually has really good pick and roll ball handler numbers. And I hope because of that, we see a little bit of like the Dame, pick and pop for Giannis, which I think also can be pretty devastating. So I think it's been kind of a process that way. I don't know exactly why. I mean, I think even with all those things, they should have still done it more, both under Griffin and Doc. And I guess, the 2 games of Prunty or however many it was, 2 weeks of Prunty. But yeah, I don't know if there's a great answer, but I certainly think the emphasis is there now. And everything Doc Rivers says is like, that's the play. We need to have that, right? Like we need to be better at that. So I'd be pretty surprised next season if we didn't see a whole lot more of at least actions with both of them. It doesn't have to be like, of course, the same pick and roll every time, but I certainly hope we see more of that.
I thought what was also interesting about the Dame fit is even when it seems to make so much sense immediately, when you look at the time of year the trade was made, it's like limited time for him to get used to his new surroundings. And then like you're thrown into just the beginning of the season process, basically. It probably takes longer time to hash out chemistry. And in general, with the exception of like the Kevin Durant era Golden State Warriors, even though that didn't perfectly click all the time, like it seldom just works to the point that, you should pick these people to win a title. And
yeah.
I don't want to necessarily give the Bucks an entire pass, but I looked at it as that is like, they should be more dangerous this year. Now, with that said, what should we be lasering in on to see from Damian Lillard this year? Is it really just, I very much harped to, in a good way, like this dude shot like 33% on spot up threes last year. That's not going to even if you think he's getting older, there's no way in hell that happens again. But like, is that one of the features that we're like, okay, like that's what we need to look at? Or is there something else that we should really be laser focused on with the Dame fit?
Yeah, I think it's probably just the effectiveness. I think he got to a point where I liked the way he played. I think sometimes he could have been a little more aggressive. I think the combination was he really, to his credit, really wanted to not be like, hey, I'm Dame, motherfuckers. Like, give me the ball every possession. Like, he was very, I would say, gracious to Giannis, of course, but also like he'd go every time this topic came up and he would talk about it, he'd be like, you guys forget about Khris Middleton. Like, Khris Middleton is awesome. Like, I'm figuring out how to work with Giannis and with Khris Middleton and with Brook Lopez. So, like, he really wanted to be like, I'm the new guy here. You guys have won a title. I've never done that. Like, I want to fit in. And I think over the course of the year, the team and Giannis to an extent were like, hey, you got to be Dame though. Like that's all very nice. We appreciate where you're coming from. Like shoot the ball from the logo a bunch of times. And I think again, like Giannis had his most efficient season ever. It kind of worked out that way anyway, but it can be a lot better. I think his being a little more aggressive, although I do think I underrated not watching him every day. He is more of a true point guard than I think I realized. He really likes to and is very good at creating for others as well, which probably sounds stupid, but I think the level to which he does it, like I thought of him as more of a shooter than a creator. He likes to be both. He wants to be a true point guard. He is a true point guard. So I don't think he's going to score like 35 again by any means, but being more aggressive, but just more efficient. I will say the other things he's talked about are, he didn't get his usual offseason routine in last year because he had to pass a physical. He knew he was getting traded, but he didn't get traded for a long time. And he cited that a lot of times. And in this piece that was just last week from one of the beat reporters who was out there said, like, I feel great. Like, and he's very much like, anyone who's writing me off is going to, look silly. Like, well, we're going to go out there and prove it. Like him as a player, the Bucks as a team. And I think, was going through like moving for the first time, was going through what became kind of a publicized divorce at the time, being away from his family and from Portland for the first time. So I think there's just an added level of comfort on and off court that he thinks for sure, of course, as a professional player. And I think as an analyst biased of like, yeah, he's going to look, I think, quite a bit better last year. Also, like by the playoffs, he was able to just turn it on and be that 35-point per game guy. So I think that was helpful, even only in like 3 games, but of seeing like he can still do it. Like it's not just gone. He's not just switch flipped old. Like I don't think it's that simple.
And also, it's to your point, some of his best moments last year were without Giannis. And so it's like a matter of him finding not necessarily a perfect analog for that player with Giannis, but like when to be that guy more often with Giannis, or like how to figure out how to fit that into the larger context of the Giannis, Khris, Brook Lopez dynamic. And I'm so fascinated to see how that clicks, because again, we are sitting here nitpicking and like they were still just rampaging over opponents when they were on the court together. And so like, that's just like, oh, well, what does this look like if it's fully clicking?
Yeah. That's the big question, I think. That's like number one. And it's really tantalizing. And I think they've got good personnel around them to make the most of it. I almost wonder, like, there's going to be some interesting questions of like who takes less shots. Bobby Portis won't, I'll tell you that much, which is an interesting thing. But they have a lot of skilled offensive players, which is a good thing. And we know a lot of them will miss time throughout the season, so that'll help. But it's going to be interesting kind of figuring out like where do these shots break down, like who is losing more, who's maintaining, et cetera.
I thought Giannis did a good job reorienting his game last year to try and adapt to Dame. When you look at, fewer of his shots were going unassisted. It felt like he was more complimentary. He cut out a lot of just like the perimeter stuff. Like you said, he had his most efficient season. Was that like a conscious decision by him? And like how you also did mention like maybe he doesn't necessarily love a lot of the stuff that you would typically do alongside the peak version of Dame. Like what just goes into all of that? Do we expect sort of this progression, evolution, whatever you want to call it, transition to continue?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we'll see if, and I don't know if it's going to be like a straight linear line of like now he's going to shoot 70% from the field, maybe, but probably not. I think it was almost by default. I really do, because I think you look at the way defenses, approach the floor against the Bucks when they were healthy. And Giannis has just never seen single coverage like that since he's become this level of player, since 2017, 18, whatever it is. Like if you're one-on-one with Giannis, unless you have one of, we'll say like maybe 10 guys in the league, like you're probably just losing at that point. Like you just can't, you have to just foul and hope he misses 1 or 2, which, happens frequently enough, unfortunately for Giannis at this point. And that was like all the time. I mean, if you're sending 2 to the ball, it's a 4-on-3 or a 4-on-4 at best. And that's just like Giannis has never worked in that kind of space before. So I think it could be even better, because it was almost like he was benefiting more indirectly from the Dame partnership. There wasn't as much of like, oh, I'm right at the rim and I can just dunk. It would be like, okay, now I'm 4-on-3 and I can just beat one guy, but like kind of in like the half open floor, right? In the short roll, I'll just get around or get through this one guy and score. I think it can be even easier, a lot of these possessions. But I think Giannis is like always been a willing playmaker. He's never like the Jokic kind of passer. I think he's probably a better passer than people think, especially
a much better passer than people think, because I would go as far as to say that.
But it's not in the same way. He's not necessarily like throwing guys open as much, but it's like he can do things physically that I don't know if any other player can do. Especially you see him on the baseline. He will like wrap and be like, it feels like 10 feet out of bounds and just throw a dime from that angle to a wide open shooter. And I think they've built an offense in a way that he's gotten very comfortable with where to put that ball and, where to know where shooters will be. So I think it was almost like by default, he had a really good season from that perspective. I think he was able to cut out a lot of shots that he probably doesn't even want to take that much, the pull-ups and everything. He always does some, like there's always this like, maybe this is the year he figures it out. And then he's just like the consensus best player in the world again. And truly, truly unguardable. But I think it was just like things were just easier for him than they've ever been. And I think they can even get a little bit more easy, which, is a pretty exciting Bucks thought to have.
And it's interesting too, because of the way he played last year. And so when I'm doing the outlines for this year, I'm obviously seeing what we talked about last year. We talked about like, how can Giannis age more gracefully just because of I don't want to use the word reliant, but how much of a weapon his athleticism is. You look at last year, athletic as hell. He's still there, but like that's a version of Giannis where it's like, oh, like that's what he could look like into his mid-30s and just still be dominant.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that, and there's still probably more of just like I don't even care about the threes anymore. The elbow jumper and like the elbow post ups are the big ones for me. And we got to see a little bit of it in the Olympics, and I think we saw a little bit of it last year. But like a little bit more of just not even like fadeaway jumpers, but just like post hooks, stuff like that. Where I think again, like if he's in a mismatch, he can get his 2 points, but probably not work as hard. And that's going to be really key the older he gets as well. So I like to see even a little bit more of that. But yeah, just generally, he's still like he controls his movement so well. He uses the glass so well when he's going at the rim that any little advantage made his life a whole lot easier.
I also wonder if he could take something. I did not plan on mentioning this until you said something, but like could take something out of Kristaps Porzingis's book where it's like, okay, you might be catching it with your back to the basket, but like pivot around and just shoot over dudes. Like you don't need to like fade away, or you're just so freaking tall.
Yeah, you're just like just be taller. I mean, I think Porzingis might have like 4 inches on him still, but yeah, Giannis is big enough that he should be able to do like just literally just like look at the backboard and just like bounce it off of there, man. No one can do anything. If they put a 6'6" guy on you to draw a charge, he literally can do nothing about that, Giannis.
What do we make of the Brook Lopez murmurings? Is this just dude is older, headed into the final year of his contract? The Bucks did underachieve relative to expectations last year, so this is typical due diligence, or is there something there? Like I personally, just based off Giannis's best defensive role and like how good Brook Lopez still is, like I just find the idea of it kind of bonkers. But again, I'm a million feet removed from the situation, so this is so stupid. This might have been the question that I'm most excited to ask you about because I don't understand. Like, again, they're not super loud, but like the murmuring on Brook, I just don't understand it from the Bucks' perspective.
We want Brook Lopez to retire here, right? Like very clearly, like we don't want to trade Brook Lopez. This is after all the murmurings and everything. So I think he's not been traded because he is so good and he plays such an important role. And it's a role they have nothing else for. And they really haven't at all. They've had backup centers. They tried like they dropped Bender like 4 years ago. Like they've tried to like, can we find the next one? You know what I mean? Like here's a big guy who can shoot. Like maybe we can develop him. No one's been close. No one's been in the same stratosphere. And there's not that many guys in the league out there who are. I think part of it was I think other teams are interested because it is a rare and very valuable archetype. I think he's an expiring, so it's always going to be a conversation. But I think they ultimately didn't and have never pulled the trigger because it is like, I mean, we don't have to infer. Giannis has said, Brook Lopez does a ton. I don't want to do that. Like he was out that 1 year when he had the back surgery. Giannis was like, this sucks. Like, Brook, please come back. Like very plainly, like, I don't like doing this. Like, this is really hard. Our team misses him a lot. We have DeMarcus Cousins out there at the 5, like a fun little Bucks era, but, not good for the old defense by any means. So I think it's mostly it's like, they only have so many assets. So if you want to get in a conversation, like if we thought, could they trade him for someone like, and I'm not saying 1-for-1 before people get mad, they will anyway. Like, is there a deal where they get a Luguentz Dort? If OKC is like, I didn't shoot much in the playoffs. We got rid of Giddey. We have Caruso now. Maybe we don't need him. Then of course they go and sign Isaiah Hartenstein. So it's like, that's not happening. Houston loves him. Would they trade Dylan Brooks for him in some sort of a deal? Where again, like, let's just get this defensive, all defense level guy to stick next to Dame and be like, you take every hard assignment and let Giannis roam. And, we'll figure out a center. We'll just get some athletic center. Dame makes our spacing different. Maybe we can survive without Brook Lopez's spacing. We just need a rim protector. But then of course it's like, maybe that makes sense. Then Gary Trent Jr. walks in the door and it's like, okay, well, the 2-guard hole is pretty much gone. It's not ideal, but again, you're not dying for one of those. And it's easy in theory, I think, to say, we'll just sign one of those rim protectors. We'll just go get one of those guys. But it's like, who? You looked at the top free agent centers, and it was like Valanciunas, who maybe would have fit, is really not that athletic either, but was way out of their price range. And I think went too cheap, but was still way out of the Bucks price range. And then it's like Daniel Tice. I like Daniel Tice, a good backup. If you're starting Daniel Tice, you're not feeling great. I don't think the Pelicans are feeling
Shots
great.
fired, Pelicans fans.
Sorry, Pels fans. I don't think they are. I think they would like Brook Lopez too, to be honest. So it's really like it's always kind of been like this weird situation because he's been old for a while, right? Like we would love a younger center. We have and have never really had an opportunity to get one. And I think they can't really sign a good backup because when they're all healthy, the guy doesn't play. Like they had Robin Lopez. They just got rid of him. They had Serge Ibaka. He asked out because there was just no minutes. When they have Brook, Giannis, and Bobby, that's all the 5 minutes between those 3 players. And they never have a good draft pick. Like skilled 7-footers just go too early, right? Like we thought they might be able to get Kel Ware. So maybe they draft him and either keep Brook to mentor him or then they finally move Brook. He goes like 14. It wasn't even close. So I just think they've always wanted him to be a little more redundant and they haven't been able to. He's just too valuable. So they just keep paying him and maybe they dangle him, but there's not really a move out there that makes sense. And so here we are, Brook Lopez still a buck. And maybe we see, I would love my personal, like what I'm trying to manifest is a Horford extension now, but Brook might be too valuable to take that at this point. Like I still think there's hunger around the league for him. So it's kind of complicated. I think they would like to have options there and they just don't have any. So it's like, we'll just stick with this all defensive level rim protector, I guess.
Yeah, it almost feels like if you were going to trade Lopez, you skew towards a big who either stretches the floor or protects the rim, and then you're hopefully getting like an athletic or disruptive perimeter player. So like you're trading 1 for 2, and like there's definitely not one team out there that like meets that. Like I thought about a little bit, but there would still need to be a third team. But like Portland, if you believed RW3 was healthy, and then it's like, do you like Matisse Thybulle? Like, no, that doesn't do it. So then you need to rope in a third team. And also Portland's not going to want, but they have 80 bigs already.
They have so many centers. And there was like some talk because like Bobby's been a trade guy we talk about a lot too. But so it's like, would you do Bobby Portis for Robert Williams III? I just don't know if you can if you're the Bucks in this spot with this many injury liabilities already. Being like the guy who played like 15 games last season or 3 games last season and has played 15 and like I just don't think you can. I mean, if it was like a vet minimum, if he's like available, then for sure, right? There's no real downside. But having to give up like a core player, that's really tough. Also, Matisse Thybulle, not a big Doc Rivers fan. So I always have to mention that. Goes up in trades. I don't think that's going to happen for multiple reasons.
I just don't think he's good enough. Like if you're also that big, too. But I will say I probably would make the Portis for RW. I would roll the dice on just the Bobby Portis contract coming up. However, I only would do that if like Brook Lopez is not on the Bucks, because as you already outlaid, like your backup 5, like you probably could play RW3 and Brook Lopez together if you really wanted to. Because RW3 can be like, he can guard in space, have Brook protect the rim, and then you flip it on offense, like have Brook spot up. But like you just said, your backup center is not going to play a ton. And Bobby Portis can play in different configurations with Milwaukee's front court.
Yeah, he can play in any configuration offensively and none of them defensively, but they find a way.
Khris Middleton coming off buy one, get one ankle surgery, apparently.
Yeah.
He's got this weird trend of just like gets injured, takes a while to ramp up, and then like is molten just in time for them to see their playoff hopes dashed early.
Yeah.
What's the level of concern here with that trend and just like now these ankle surgeries and where this team is? Like, if you had to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, like what is the level of concern for Khris Middleton's, I guess, like sustainability, the durability, whatever you want to frame it as?
I'd probably say like a 3 or 4 for his overall. I still do trust him that when they really need him, he is going to be there. And just to the topic of the ramp up, that's not what he needed to like get on the court initially. That was the Bucks medical staff trying to make him as sustainable as possible. And I would say, frankly, it worked. And some people will laugh at that. Obviously, he did miss time, but it was like 2 different times during the season. Like someone just landed, like someone ended up under his leg when he was jumping, and he turned an ankle. Like I think calling him, he's been prone to injuries, but I don't think it's like, it's not like he jogs and just breaks down. Like Kevin Durant's under him on a jumper, and then I think it was he went up for a layup against Indiana and came down on Siakam or coming up the court or something. And it's like turns an ankle, and you could see it happen. And he tries to play through both. He does play through the Pacers one. And then just gets the scopes this offseason. So I think the overall trend to me is more concerning than where he's at right now. I actually think maybe they'll be careful with him coming into the season, but I would expect a lesser ramp up than last year, just because he was seen in summer league getting around just fine after the ankle procedures. So I think it was kind of more just like scoping out those ankles more than like a big surgical fix. I'm obviously not a doctor, so don't take my medical advice by any means. But I just trust that like Khris is a gamer. He'll figure it out when they need him the most, and just hope that he has a little better luck this year with the procedures. But he was kind of like, not angry, but kind of got annoyed about how slowly they ramped him up last year. He was like, I can play more. Like I could play 30 minutes when he's playing 18, but it also worked. So I wouldn't be surprised if they were similarly cautious. I don't know if he will play on the second night of their 16 back-to-backs this year, which frankly I'm fine with. There's none of those in the playoffs. I'd rather be careful with him. So it sucks, but I trust him overall still, even through everything, because he somehow was their best player and almost got him to a game 7 against Indiana, which still to me is wild given the run they went on after that.
Offensively, I definitely trust him, and his game is not necessarily prided on like any sort of explosion. But defensively, it feels like he's lost a few steps over the years. It's like now coming off ankle surgeries, I'm just like, oh man, like all this lower body stuff. I'm just wondering it's just going to take its toll. And then it's, well, how valuable does it, like, is it to have a Gary Trent Jr.? Like, does that by default make a Taurean Prince or a DeLon Wright more important? Because like you kind of need that extra defensive juice in there. And then if you're leaning on Taurean Prince for defensive juice, like that's good, like opens up a whole different can of worms. With this, looking at this team, there are some just sort of interesting young guys on there, or a bunch of young guys on the roster. Whenever you just go through and get a couple of just like your quick hitter thoughts on them, and sad face emoji, I feel like we should begin with MarJon Beauchamp.
Did you hear what Doc said about him on the broadcast with PJ Carlesimo?
I did not.
Basically just like, they were talking about the importance of, and I should have pulled it up, but it was like, just like knowing where to be and what to do all the time on the NBA floor. And he's like, that's something that MarJon's just struggled with. And we're like, did you just say that on TV? Like, it's obviously true, but like, did he just say that on I think national technically television? I mean, Summer League barely counts because most people were tuned out of Bucks games because they were pretty abysmal in Summer League. But I think he's got some really important skills. I think has not been able to consistently put it all together in a way that helps the team. I think his mental game just needs a little bit of improvement. I think he either gets way too high or way too low, and it gets him into these funks. And that's just like this is the worst kind of circumstance for a player like that. When even if you play well, your opportunities are going to be limited. But if you don't, it's just really hard to stay on the floor. And I think he has not improved enough at like the scalable NBA things to have a consistent role. Like some of his best moments are like he's like isoing someone or like hitting a pull up, and it's like they never need you to do that.
His comments about that though were hysterical, where it's like he like prefers to have the ball or needs to have the ball. And I'm like, buddy,
yeah, it's like you got pretty unlucky with where you got drafted. I mean, I enjoy covering him with the Wisconsin Herd here in Oshkosh, where he gets to do that all that he wants. But do you know what the crazy thing was? By the end of Summer League, AJ Johnson, the 19-year-old, was handling the ball more and having MarJon screen for him. Like it was really a disastrous Summer League for whatever that means. I think it means a little, not a ton maybe. But I feel like the time is over because I think some of these other young guys have shown to be either have higher ceilings or just be better fits with what the team actually needs. He's still a pretty good perimeter defender. That's why it's a little shocking that he hasn't latched on more, but has just not been able to do enough consistently, I'd say.
I thought he did a good job offensively of being in the right spots as a rookie. And then it just feels like that, or at least a better job of it. Another younger guy who does seem to be liked by Doc Rivers is AJ Green.
Yeah. Yeah, he didn't even have to go to Summer League, which I think says a lot. He was playing regularly around 14, 15 minutes per game under Doc, so like a real rotational role. I think really proved that he can defend at the NBA level. That was his thing last year. He still hit shots. I mean, obviously he's a shooter first, but I thought did really well defensively overall. Had some really nice passing as well. It was tough. He did not shoot well at all in the playoffs. I'm not going to bury him on the 6-game sample size at this point, but I think really had an opportunity to even further entrench himself. But I think already has come in probably, I would think, above a player like Pat Connaughton at this point based on the recent sample and kind of career trajectories. Sorry, Pat C. But I think he's there. Like, I think he will play every game. I'd be like, something would have to change pretty dramatically at this point in their rotation. He's just proven like he can hang. He's not a defensive liability. He's not a black hole, despite being a good shooter. And the most important thing, and something young guys struggle with a lot, is if he is open, he's not one to hesitate. He just puts it up. If he's 0 for 3, he'll put up the fourth the same way. That sounds like a weird thing that would be important, but when young guys don't do that on teams like the Bucks with how good they are, you're just really unplayable. And that's some of the MarJon thing too. Is like you get the open corner shot, you dribble into a floater. You just can never ever do that. You just need to take the right shot every time. So AJ Green, I've been ranting and raving about. He came on our podcast, was very generous of him. Really nice guy, and I think he will play a lot this season.
But there you have it. Look, the way to get into the Bucks rotation is to go on the Eurostep podcast.
It didn't work out. If Ty Washington Jr. has a good year in Phoenix, it's really true. It did not work out for him. It did work out for AJ Green. Also, Javon Carter, $21 million after coming on the pod. So any players who are listening,
that's both a correlation and a causation in my book. Pencil it in. Where are we at with Andre Jackson, who always just seems like he's either just an afterthought or then like he's on the court and they're asking him to do way too much?
Yeah, he's intoxicating. Did not have a good summer league either. I think was actually pretty disappointing. He's not a summer league player. He's very much a off ball, roving, screen setter, cutter, defend all over the place kind of guy, rebound, putbacks. And like the lack of organization wasn't good for him, but also even the things you wanted him to be good at, he wasn't necessarily. The big thing I'm going to look at this year is, did he take a step back with his shot? It looked like there was a little more of a hitch in summer league, which is very concerning. He had an atrocious jumper in college with the UConn, but really it seemed to simplify it. It was still ugly, but it was simple and quick his rookie year. That's going to be a big thing for me. And also just like one of the underrated things that will be brought up by the Andre Jackson Jr. proponents, we call him Ajax. The Bucks lost the minutes with him and Giannis on the court together, which makes sense given their skill sets, how much they overlap and everything. That's really bad, though. You really can't afford to ever lose Giannis minutes. So I think he will have a chance to play. I am less sure he will play every game. I think he will fight to be around the 10th man, given all the talent on the roster. And it will really depend on, can some of the newer additions being less old and slow than like Jay Crowder and Pat Bev make his role less necessary? And can he take a step forward really offensively and fouling less, which was a huge issue for him?
I initially thought that this might be like the player who's least likely to see any meaningful minutes, but then the way you talked about MarJon Beauchamp, I do have to ask, like, where are we at with Khris Livingston?
I couldn't be a bigger fan. I don't know if you knew this or not. I have been a Khris Livingston fan since probably early last year, watching him with the Herd up close, because he is one of those players, and this is a pretty rare thing, like loves to go get in and bump and rebound, right? Loves to get in there, trash talker. The Herd posted one of his highlights. He poster dunked somebody, and they cut it immediately after, but you could still see him get in a player's face, start to talk shit directly to them. They literally could not cut it quick enough to get that out. He has that kind of fire, has really developed his jumper, had a bad Kentucky 3-point percentage, but insisted to me early in the year and has proven over his Herd season and with Summer League that like I'm a good shooter. Like I didn't shoot well in Kentucky, but I can shoot. Kind of a mess of a Kentucky team. I think he has a chance because they have been dying for that PJ Tucker replacement. I don't know if he's there yet. I think he is the type of player that does those things that the Bucks really need, of just like go box out, because not enough players outside of Brook Lopez box out. Like cut, get to the rim more. He's made some really nice Summer League passes. Hit open threes, but that's like even less important now. Like credibly take them, sure. You don't need to be 45%. If you're like 37%, but you do all those other things, that's just fine. He needs to be a little quicker on his feet defensively, which I think will hold him back. He put himself in position in Summer League to fight Andre Jackson Jr. and MarJon and be that 10th guy. I hope he gets a chance to play with the primary players, because I think he would look really good. I think he's really well suited to be a role player, which is kind of a rare thing, I think, for a lot of young guys this early on. So really excited about him.
Where are you at with, a lot of people hated the AJ Johnson pick. I can appreciate the swing, just watching him, even like the low moments, the on-ball speed is there. I think the jumper will actually be fine, but like, how does he scale to a team? Like we've talked about this with Beauchamp, we talked about this other guys, to a team that's not going to really give him the ball, I would assume. Like, how does he scale to that?
He is like a draft and stash in Oshkosh to me. Like, I don't think there's any world where he plays at all this year outside of, we're giving 5 guys the night off on the second night of a back-to-back, right? Like we have a game 18 hours after a game, and we have to travel and go get your touches. We don't really care what happens, win or loss here. I think it's a long-term thing. I think they have such few picks going forward. And this is kind of a philosophical change dating back to like 2 years ago when they started to take like just young players in twos. And like AJ Green, I think it was a two-way first and then converted, was right after the draft. Chris Livingston and Ajax were both second-round picks. MarJon was a first. And now they have two pretty good picks in AJ Johnson and Tyler Smith in terms of like where they were taken in the draft. Now, I'm not saying it was a good pick now. We'll have to see how he plays out. But like 23 and 33 are high picks for the Bucks. Yeah. I think their thought was like, we want the best possible player over the first two contracts or whatever, not the best guy this year. I think they had a pretty good idea. They were going to have some success in free agency and thought, the guy doesn't matter. Like if we take a 23-year-old, he's also not going to play. We want the guy who has the highest ceiling over those first 8 years or whatever it is. So they took him. I've seen some people say, like, does this mean like they're going to be ready to give up on Dame earlier? I don't think this means anything about any decisions for any players currently on the roster. I think they're literally just like, we need young players who are going to be cost controlled. We're going to take swings on exciting ones and see if they pan out. We're far from that happening. I was way lower on it during the draft. I really liked Keyshawn George. I was a big fan of him. I thought maybe he could help a little earlier, but I'll be the first to say I'm not an expert scout. And I thought AJ Johnson's summer league was really fun. He really impressed and kind of, I think a lot of people, even if they still disagreed, they saw the vision after that of like, okay, like if he pans out, he's like probably at least a starter. And it's just really hard to find those at the late 20s and beyond.
Based on what you just said, let me see if I can ask this question correctly. Does getting Tyler Smith imply they're ready to move on from Giannis Antetokounmpo a little bit sooner?
Dude, there was and I don't think he was saying this, but Jake Fisher of Yahoo at one point reported like, it could be an option for the Bucks to start Tyler Smith at the 5 in one of the Brook Lopez things. I was like, Tyler Smith can't defend the 1, 2, 3, or the 4. He certainly could not defend the 5 at this point. I don't think he ever will be, frankly. I don't think it means they're going to move on from Giannis or Brook or Bobby Portis. I do think it made myself and some other Bucks analysts / fans feel a little better about the AJ Johnson pick. It's one of those where like, I think if they had taken them in the reverse order, it's a less pan draft, which is a little weird, right? But I think like, okay, the big guy who shoots, like that's fine, flyer, I guess, versus the really, I think was seen as very far away point guard, who again, I thought looked closer than the consensus in Summer League, but it's also Summer League. Tyler Smith is fun. I think his upside is like a Channing Frye, Michael Porter Jr. kind of player more than anything. Like, obviously that's if it really works out. I'm not saying he will for sure do that, but that's a really useful player. And on a Giannis team, a really, really useful player. So excited to see, can he just figure out where to be at all defensively? But he's a good athlete with a really good, quick shot. So it's a fun player to land.
What do we make of John Horst saying that the way their roster is kind of balanced when you look at just the number of young guys is intentional? It's obviously a nod to the collective bargaining agreement, the second apron, but does that kind of mean like, it's not like the Bucks have a ton of stuff to trade, but it's like, are the Bucks kind of settling into like, well, we're trying to plan for like the next era at this point, and we're not going to be necessarily as aggressive in maybe doubling down on, let's just call it the core 4 if you want to throw Bobby Portis in there too as well.
I would put Brook in over Bobby, to be honest, even given the age and contract.
Like plus Bobby Portis is what I meant. Like it just, I was wondering if like his comments are indicating, not that they're clearly all in on this window, but it's like, oh, we're definitely trying to plan for this next era of Bucks basketball.
I don't think so. I think it's more a reaction to they tried for so long to get these expendables group of 36-year-old players because they were so good and they were so helpful. And it just has not worked for a long time, right? Like they've just kept bringing these guys, Joe Ingles, Jay Crowder, Pat Bev was okay. But like, I just think they've kind of made this decision. We would rather take the long-term flyers than just have more of these guys who probably can't play. And it's a little awkward if we don't give them minutes, even though they actually cannot play. I think it's more of we'd rather have real competition with players with an upward trajectory who maybe can play than add in, whatever. I don't want to besmirch anyone, right? That's available. Like, what is Wes Matthews? I think is a free agent right now. Bring back Wes Matthews for the third time. He's like 39 years old. Like,
bring back Jay Crowder.
I don't think that's likely. I saw him on a boat with Malik Beasley this week on Instagram, and I was like, I wonder what these guys are just talking about. Like the Bucks, though, Bucks made such bad decisions, man. I bet that's what they were. I would too. I mean, good for those guys. But yeah, I think they're just like done trying that, and I think it's more about the rest of the Giannis era. How can we find more helpful players? Because I don't think, if you subtract those 5 players you mentioned, and it's like 4 years from now, are these young guys going to be good enough for us to do anything of note? Probably not, right? You're probably cooked either way. But like, can 3 of the guys hit to be role players or better? And then we have a core around 33-year-old Giannis that is like still functional with like a vet min here and a trade there.
So when you look at this roster before watching any games, what is their like biggest need void to you?
An athletic backup rim protector, probably. I think that is the biggest gaping hole. And it's not necessarily like, again, they can fill out their rotation pretty well, but I don't think they have a good matchup option outside. I mean, Giannis at the 5 is this, but they don't want to do that too often. And I think they would like to have another player as well. And I think they kind of looked at it and weren't able to really find one. But I think this is where the Bobby Portis thing becomes kind of a weird fit. I mean, this idea that they built the roster around Drew, that was kind of the, they first got Bobby Portis that summer too. And I think being able to be like an ISO big, it's just a lot less valuable on this version of the Bucks, and even less so now with like a Gary Trent Jr. Like if you go through Bucks actions you want to see, I think you can name quite a few before you get to Bobby Portis post up ISO. You know what I mean? But he still wants to do it, and he doesn't want to give it up. He's like, this is still a big part of the offense, and he just doesn't have that ability to be that like mobile rim protector or rim finisher. I think he finished. This is a stat. I don't know if you knew. Bobby Portis completed his first alley-oop dunk as a Milwaukee Buck late last season. Like for his body type and size, you would have assumed there would be a handful at least. He's not really a screen and rim runner. He's just a different kind of player. I think they could really use one of those. I think you watch the last playoffs and there's so many of them helping. I think the Bucks could really use that just to not just for big depth, but like some matchups aren't good for Brook. Some are, some aren't. The Pacer series obviously wasn't. Like if they had an Isaiah Jackson type player, as meager as that sounds, sorry, Isaiah Jackson, I think it's like a piece of optionality for them that they're lacking. So I'd say that I think their guard and wing depth is pretty good at this point. I think they don't have that and they can use it.
I wonder what it would take to get like a Nick Richards.
I love Nick Richards.
It would be interesting for them too. Day'Ron Sharpe out of Brooklyn. Yeah. I would be curious like how much those two, because they're cheap, so it'd be easy to salary match, given the Bucks' situation. But those would be 2 interesting options if they're looking to go that backup big archetype. Is there anything, whether it's a concern or something positive, maybe a hidden strength about this team that is flying under the radar, not receiving enough attention, even if it's on the the national discourse rather than just the local Milwaukee level?
I mean, I've already talked about the Dame Giannis stuff. I think I'll do a double answer. I think Khris Middleton generally, I think is still like it's funny because even among Bucks fans, there's just like meme that always gets shared of like the cycle of Khris Middleton, where it's like he gets shit on, he plays okay, he plays really well, everyone loves him, he slumps a little bit or misses time, and it cycles. And I think even though the last time we saw him on court, he was awesome, the surgery thing has turned the wheel more, so we're back to not really believing it. I think he's just like still really good, and I don't want to like rank him league wide or whatever. I think it's really hard to do with like his different states we see over 1 year. But I think like if he's moderately healthy in the playoffs, it's still such a huge factor that I think gets a little under regarded. I mean, you go back to 21, he was their main offensive initiator on a title team. And I think he's not as far from that guy as people think. The other one is I do think some of their young guys have actual juice now, which has not been the case. Maybe Dante, if not Dante, since Malcolm Brogdon, who was not even young. Like it's been a long time since I think they've had, even I have not been that excited about like at any point, like DJ Wilson is going to be that guy or whoever else.
Wilson. Yeah.
Yeah. Partially because they just don't pick that often, but I think between in the shorter term, AJ Green, I'm a big Chris Livingston guy, and I'll say Andre Jackson Jr. as well. And then longer term, I am kind of excited about the swings on AJ Johnson, who is like the most fun ball handler they've drafted probably since Brandon Knight. And then Tyler Smith, who again, just like that size, that skill set is interesting. Like I think they're going to be in a position to have some of these young guys who pop. Like Bucks fans always bemoan, like the Heat always have another guy, right? These teams that always, I think they can do it at least to some extent, which is just a huge lift. Because if you look at the past couple of years before last year, they just always relied on their core guys and then the vet minimum vets again, right? Like, okay, we'll bring in whoever it is, Marvin Williams, Wesley Matthews, the list goes on. I think they need that juice, especially as the core gets even older. I think it's really going to help them and it's going to push these guys in a good way. I think they got way too old in the early 2020s. I think this will help them quite a bit.
I will say AJ Green probably usurped Andre Jackson as my favorite Bucks young player. Although I do, just again, based off what little I know about Johnson, there's like a chaos to the way he plays that I feel like even if it's not going to go well, his minutes might be the ones that I'd be most like want to see. But in terms of actual impact, I still think AJ Green is like I think he's now usurped Andre Jackson as my favorite guy there.
He's very plug and play, right? Like it's very easy to throw a guy out there with almost any lineup as long as you're not too light defensively. But I think he's gonna have a real role, I think.
And he defends a little bit better and bigger than you, because what is he, 6'3", 6'4"? So he's not super huge.
He's probably about 6'4", 6'5", but he's solid. Yeah, he's a strong dude. Iowa, corn-fed, went to college for 85 years in Northern Iowa. He can do a little more offensively than you think too. He's a solid player, I think. Yeah, because they've had like the old new shooters as well, like the Bryn Forbes kind of players. I think he's a little more well-rounded than someone like that, if not as quick, or if not, he's probably actually a better shooter, if not as quick as Bryn Forbes.
So he's got that, what would the kids say, the corn-fed Riz? That's what we're going to say about AJ Green. There we go.
Yeah, sure.
Are you ready to enter the cookie cutter portion of the podcast?
Let's cut cookies.
So what does the top 10 of their rotation look like at full strength? It feels like they're probably like between 6 and 8 locks. So there's a starting lineup of Giannis, Dame, Middleton, Brook, and then Gary Trent Jr. Yep. I would throw, obviously, Bobby Portis is in there for 6th. And just because I think that they are useful, like at least one or Taurean Prince or DeLon Wright feels like a lot to me.
I think you can put both.
And where do you go from there then? That's 8.
Yeah, that's why it's like, it's going to be a lot of competition with the vets and the young guys, and also just the young guys amongst themselves, because I think there is at least one or two of them that deserve some consideration, and there's not spots for that. I would go AJ Green, maybe even ahead of some of these vets, but like, to not belabor the point, I would throw him in there solidly as well. Like I think on par with a Taurean Prince or a DeLon Wright. So that's now 9. I think I have 9 locks. I think 9 players I feel very confidently will play, and it works pretty well positionally too, right? Like DeLon Wright at the 1, Prince is a forward, Green is like a 2-3, and then Bobby will play 5 for them, 4 or 5 for them. So then it's like you can probably take one more perimeter-ish player. I'm going to put Chris Livington at 10. I am such a believer that I'm going to give him that spot. I think they need Andre Jackson Jr. a little less now. I have not loved his summer, but I think those two, and I will say, I think Pat Connaughton still has a shot to be 10 as well. Like I think a lot of Bucks fans just gave up. He's the worst contract in the league now, yada yada.
No, please tell me that's not like that's like
they're like it's impossible to get rid of him. It's this $8 million a year is so unwieldy for this and one more year that he's. I had someone. I was like, what do you not like about this offseason? Like they got Gary Trent Jr., Taurean Prince. They kept all their main guys. It's like Pat's still on the roster. It's not a good offseason. It's like, what do you mean?
I respect that level of doomsdayism. I'm not going to lie.
It's crazy. Yeah, people will find any reason. Pat and Bobby are still here. Pat's still here. I think he actually handled the ball really well last year. I think he's continued to build out a skill set. He was kind of their backup point guard at times and did a weirdly good job of like, I'll run a pick and roll action. Like I'll swing a cross court pass. I think he's not like going to just like roll over and be out of the rotation. So I think those two young guys and Pat C will be fighting for that 10th spot. And the other, MarJon too. Like the rookies, I just don't think are close. And that's, I think, the whole roster. So yeah, I think it's going to be very competitive for 10. And like the first 9, I'd be kind of surprised if one of the outside players broke into that group. It'd be fun. It'd be a fun surprise, but I'd be surprised.
What do you think will wind up being their most used crunch time unit? Is it just the starting 5, or is there potential to tweak from there?
I think it'll probably be the starting 5. I think the big question with the Bucks, for 5+ years now has been, can teams force them off of Lopez, right? Like if you can't, I think it's really hard to beat them. Like if Lopez is playing well against a team, their defense just tends to be so good around the rim, and their offense, like they figure it out. So I think it'll be that. And then the second one will be the small version of the lineup, like teams that get, like Boston gets too stretchy. Brook can't hang, or at least they don't feel like he hangs well enough. Who do we put out there? I'll say I think it's going to be Prince in for Lopez will be like the closing lineup.
Oh, wow.
But I don't think that's locked in. So then it would be Dame, Trent, again, Khris/Prince. They're kind of 3.5 in it there. And then Giannis will be like their smaller lineup. I don't think it'll be Bobby. I don't think they trust him enough defensively. And then I think the other players may just be too small. They really need rebounding in those groups, maybe more than anything else. I don't know if anyone else is going to give I mean, I know Prince isn't a great rebounder either, but the other players we're talking about are pretty small, or like Ajax, just like, or even Chris Livington, just so unproven. That'd be a little surprised if they made it to that spot.
It's interesting because you say, when you mentioned the Brook Lopez stuff, if you would have like rewound like 7 years ago, whatever it is, and now we're coming to here, Brook Lopez is going to be his age 36 season, I think. And
I think
it's
older.
like, how many teams like do you think could actively make it a choice for the Bucks to pull him off the floor in crunch time? And it's like Boston for me, and then like maybe OKC, who you only face twice a year unless you're in the finals. There's like, that's like pretty freaking impressive by him.
It is. It is his age 38 year. They actually, Brook played awesome against
38?
OKC. No, 36.
Oh,
Sorry.
God, you gave me
36. No, he is solidly, he turns 37 this season, but not until April. So it's his age 36 season. I don't know why I keep saying 38. They played really well against OKC because those guys didn't want to shoot enough threes. And so Brook was able to hang more, and they would just go more to a zone than making him like chase around Chet or whatever. That's going to be a big thing with OKC. Like those guys, they shoot well, but like, will you take enough to stretch out the defense? I think that bit them in the playoffs. But yeah, it's not that many teams. It's like Boston for sure, and then maybe Miami, but I don't even know how Miami's going to play. To be, I don't know what's going on.
I don't know anything about Miami.
Yeah. So, but they've been a tough one because Bam just out on the perimeter and DHOing and stuff. But yeah,
what's a funky, weird, quirky lineup you want to see Doc Rivers throw out on the court?
Oh, I want to see some of the young guys. Like I think, like Dame, AJ Green, Khris Middleton, Khris Livington, Giannis. Like inject some of that athleticism, but I think enough skill that, I mean, those guys will always get ignored if they're out there with those other players, right? But like I think they can make you pay enough, like something like that. Because that's like the Squidward future thing. That's how I'd feel watching that lineup. So yeah, I'd like to see something like that. No disrespect to Gary Trent, but like the primary three guys with some of the intriguing young guys, like I want to see AJ Johnson play with Giannis some, right? Like stuff like that, where it's just like, what can you do with the real players when it's not like, okay, we're all just messily ISOing because it's all a bunch of us who don't really know what to do yet.
Yeah, mine was going to be Giannis and Dame plus kids. So I would go with AJ Green, Johnson, and Tyler Smith. I think like that's the 5-man unit I want to see. And you could even talk me into like, now, look, you sold me on Khris Livington. Let's take Dame out and throw him right in there. I want that too.
That Giannis is going to get like a flash forward to what his career is going to look like once everyone else ages out.
We just want to let you know what it's going to look like around here in like 2031, 2032. Giannis.
So Dame walks up and he's like, now you know how I felt for over a decade now. Welcome to my life, buddy.
Okay, so as we're recording this, which is on August the 23rd, their over-under is set at 50.5. Mr. Ty Windish, are you taking the over or the under?
Smashing the over. I mean, they had their disaster season. They win 47 or 48 last year, I want to say.
Them and the Cavs, it's like their seasons did not go anywhere near according to plan. It's like they still kind of sniffed 50 victories.
Yeah, they were still the second seed until like the last day of the season. So I'm going to go over. I mean, I don't know. I don't think they're going to win like high 50s. I think the East is a little condensed at like the top 6 or 7 teams. I think a lot of teams will win high 40s or low, and then Boston may just go off. Maybe they regress, maybe not. Not regress.
Kristaps missing the like. I would be shocked if he plays before Christmas, so that could be an element. But yeah,
but it's like they have a lot of they signed all their. They signed everyone. I here's a take. How do you feel about this? I say they should have an A+ offseason because everyone's like, who did you add? Who did you retain? You were the best team in the league all year. You won the title. You kept all of them for the long term. You had to sell your team for it ish. Like that's a conflating factor, but like what more can you ask for?
Yeah, why are people down on their offseason?
But it's just like, who won the offseason? It's got to be like the Sixers or the Knicks, or it's got to be who did you add? Like that's always the combo, right? Like that's an offseason. Who did you add this offseason? Like last year, I said Bucks should get an A. They kept Khris, they kept Brook. Like this is really important things. It's like, well, that's not an addition, though. You know what I mean? Like I feel like it's viewed differently. Whereas if I'm Boston, I re-signed Tatum, I re-signed everyone. Like I feel
the
amazing
Derek
about
White
that.
extension we haven't done our grades yet for this year. We actually just finished our regrades from last year. That was a trip. But yeah, I mean, they have to get the Derek White extension alone is huge. And for what you said, the larger of, Wyc Grousbeck wants to sell the team, but still have a say. We'll see what fucking happens with that. But
That's
this
weird, but
idea,
yeah.
it might be shady as hell as to how they get there. But the fact that they just continue to reinvest in the roster in the face of this, like extending Sam Hauser is kind of like we really don't give a fuck then about like this bill right now. So it'll come due at some point and they'll make changes. But I'd be with you in the sense that when you look at it through that lens, we're drawn to think about how the NBA has peddled itself. Like it's a transactions league. And so like talent acquisition over retention. So that's a great point. But yeah, they didn't do anything wrong this offseason, that's for sure.
No, I mean they draft a guy who can maybe be good one day. Like I don't care about Baylor Shireman, but they re-signed all their centers when they have these big questions with Porzingis. But anyway, the Bucks, I think way over. I think like mid-50s is pretty reasonable. I think they'll be contending for like 1 or 2. If Boston has another 60 win, then 2. I think they'll be contending for a top couple seed in the East.
And based off the podcast you did, power ranking the Bucks' place in the East. It sounds like you're prepared to say that Boston is the only team you would be fairly confident is better than them next season.
Yeah, I think so. I think the Knicks are the closest beside that. But for me with them, I'm kind of like, what does this look like? I think it's kind of underrated how much is being added together. And, listen, I'm not going to galaxy brain and be like, it's bad they have so many good players. But like add in Bridges, add back in Randall. I think it's going to be kind of funky and like there's going to be this kind of feeling out process like the Bucks had this last year. I think they're certainly deeper, but I think they're like this is going to sound Knicks fans are going to be they're like the budget version of the Celtics. They have like 6 guys where you're like, damn, that is a good top 6. But the Celtics one is just like crazily more talented.
And also with Boston, their top 6 is universally revered. And I think when you look at the Knicks, people have and legitimately show questions about Josh Hart, Mitchell Robinson, Julius Randle. So I'd agree that it does feel like there's more boom or bust is probably strong, but there's more variance in what their outcomes could be. And I don't know that I've settled on who should be the second best team in the East, but to me, I would loop the Bucks, the Knicks, the Sixers, and like I'm pretty high on Cleveland. Like those are all teams that should be fighting. Like those just feel like bar none. I like Orlando, I like Indiana, but those feel like the 5 best teams in the league.
I agree. I think it's pretty clear. I think I'd be surprised. I mean, I think Cleveland, I don't think it's as good as the other 4 that you talk about. But regular season, if they were like the 2 or 3, would I be shocked? No, because they know they also have the continuity. And maybe to like a startling degree, they've literally signed no players that weren't on their team before, which like, okay, maybe get one, maybe do the Okoro deal finally.
Players we recorded. I think Okoro's still floating around out there.
It's like they kind of need it. If you look at their team, like you guys are a little thin, like maybe add 1 player, 2 players. They also don't have a backup big, so they have some questions still, I think. But they know how to play together. Although their best stretch of the year, they were like half dead. They make no sense. I think
just the stop and start availability. I think people are going to be surprised at how good they are. And also Evan Mobley started taking above the break threes. Those will all be, and I think that they got more into, you mentioned not having a backup center. They're staggering Mobley and Allen more. So that's like the team. I honestly will probably get killed for this, but I think of the teams that we named, the Knicks might have the lowest floor and the highest ceiling of it just because, and I think you could talk me into Philly having the lowest floor if there's like an Embiid injury, but even just like they have a real team around Tyrese Maxey, Paul George, and Embiid as well. But like with the Knicks, the integration of Julius Randle, I thought he did better accessory work last year, but that's a thing in this larger ecosystem. What's he going to look like? And also losing Isaiah Hartenstein is huge. That was like your 2-way big because Mitchell Robinson's so limited on offense. And it's now, if you're going to rely on Mitchell, okay, fine. Will he be healthy? You're not going to get a ton from him on offense aside from the rebounding element. Is Tibbs going to actually play like Julius Randle and OG as his front court, where OG is your defensive 5 and Julius is your offensive 5? I think that works out really well. But do you want OG Anunoby being taxed that much defensively? And like Josh Hart just averaged 50 minutes a game. And like, does Jalen Brunson he got injured last year. So I think the Knicks, I think they could be really good. And I like their roster overall better than a lot of these, like Milwaukee's up there for me, but like, I might like their ceiling for next season more than a Cleveland or a of Philly. But at the same time, it's like I do have more questions about the top of their roster than a lot of these other rosters.
I think one of the things that differentiates them from the other teams is they have one player who's so important in Brunson to what they do offensively. And I really wonder, like, if he misses any more, like anytime this year, with all,
Or if
they
he's
still have a
not
lot of
top
offensive
5 in
talent.
MVP voting. Like that's
Yeah,
a
or if he
realistic
just
outcome.
regressed
Yeah.
a little. Yeah, he had a crazy. Yeah, that contract discourse for him was kind of funny because everyone's like, yeah, he would have obviously gotten a full max next year. I'm like, maybe. I think it was a good season to sign the biggest possible contract after as well. I think that, I understand he probably would have gotten it, but like, I don't know, man.
I feel confident in saying he would have gotten it from the Knicks just because they don't have, especially after the Mikal Bridges trade, they had no outs. Like it was him. But I think the best way to frame it is he punted on like $12 to $13 million a year over the next 3 years. And that's, look, if you're going to save your team one Dante DiVincenzo a year is how I framed it. That's a concession.
He's clearly deserving. I didn't think it was like the craziest. I think Giannis did the same thing like the year before and received less fanfare. I wonder what played into that. But anyway,
I agree with you on the front where people have assumed that like, oh, when he can opt out in 3 or 4 years, whatever, 2028, I think it is, he's just going to get that 5-year. And I had this talk when I was speaking with Andrew Claudio of Knicks Film School on the podcast. I said, he's not getting that deal. And Claudio was like, you're like ruling it out. I was like, they're not going to give it. That is wildly irresponsible. Like that is the sacrifice that's being made. Is you could say there's an under the hand, like a handshake agreement here. He's not getting that full. It's not happening. Like it's just not happening.
I don't think for any player outside of like the Kevin Durant's, you can ever assume 3 years from now you get any sort of huge deal. I think that's especially a small guard is like the riskiest.
Look, the Clippers just like faked an excuse to get rid of Paul George, like because like the CBA is having this weird impact where I think there's like the top 5 to 10 guys, they'll be maxes, like a Giannis, let's say. He'll get max money in his next contract. But like once guys start to get into their 30s, like if you're not a top 7 player at that point, like there's going to be questions about it.
I mean, yeah, it's going to be a fascinating Dame player option in a year or two here of like which way is that going to go? Like I have no idea. I think a lot will hinge, of course, on what this year looks like, but it gets real interesting. I think we probably will get to a point where almost every player option ends up getting taken. I mean, there were vet mins taken this year that I like Cam Reddish. He's going to go find vet min somewhere. He's like, not going to chance it. I'll take the vet min in front of me, which wowed me. So yeah, I think it is a whole new league cap world.
Yeah, I didn't mean to take you on a tangent so far outside.
That was I got started. I did the Boston offseason thing that got us here.
Is there anyone else about this team we haven't discussed that you think needs to be touched upon before I let you skedaddle?
I set too high of a standard 4 years ago when I talked about like the Giannis as a play starter versus finisher thing. I haven't had as good of a one since then. And I feel like we've covered a lot of the most pressing stuff. I'll say like I am really curious to see generally what does Gary Trent Jr. look like on the Bucks? Because I think he was a pretty drastically different kind of player in Portland than he was with Toronto. And I think this is even another much different kind of situation here. And I'm really interested, like NBA players are so talented. And I think about a player like Mikal Bridges. I'm not comparing Mikal Bridges, but like was like the 3-and-D guy who did almost nothing offensively in Phoenix. And then gets the role and immediately like his whole game changes in Brooklyn. And he couldn't really sustain it, but you know what I mean? Like players, I think sometimes are more scalable than we realize. And I'm really interested in seeing, what is the version of Gary Trent Jr. where they probably need him less than any team has needed him offensively. And they really needed him defensively. What does that look like for him? How does he acclimate to that? I'm not saying it's 100% positive. I'm just very interested to see what is his role? How does he play? And what does he focus on this year?
That's interesting. So it could almost be sort of the inverse of what happened with Dillon Brooks in Houston, because we're talking about Gary Trent Jr.'s defense. But like, if you go look at Dillon Brooks' shot selection in Memphis versus Houston, completely reined in Houston. And so it's like, is Gary Trent Jr. all of a sudden going to be reined in a good way defensively for the Bucks? I don't rule it out because he has the talent. I don't know if he has like the physical tools to be like a caps lock wing defender, but like you can get by like certainly any guard position and like maybe some threes. That's a really interesting sentiment that we probably should give more consideration to. I do also wonder though how it factors in. It sometimes becomes very hard. Like Brook Lopez is kind of an exception. He gets the biannual from the Bucks and turns into this. And like sometimes players end up on minimums or discounted deals and they have so much, like even Malik Beasley only got, I thought he was good enough to get more than 1 year, $6 million. And that's all he got. So it's like, does Gary Trent Jr., does that impact his psyche at all? But I think what you mentioned at the very beginning of this podcast, to come full circle, is the difference between the minimum and the taxpayer mid-level. And like also a lot of these contenders now, I think they don't have the taxpayer mid-level because they're in the second apron. And if you're going to make like reinvent yourself or be viewed more positively around the league, there may be maybe players are coming around, even if they're younger, like GTJ, of saying, if I impact a winner, like that the Bucks go to the Eastern Conference Finals or deeper or win the title, that's going to do more for me than if I'm on Toronto or another team and I'm averaging 15, 17, 20 points a game.
Yeah, I think that's the gamble. I mean, there's always the long route too of what Portis did of, if you stay another year, then you can get the early bird,
Batum
which then you
special,
can get, then you can get, it'll probably be like 15 million a year by that point. So that's something, still less than he would have liked to make this year. I would assume he's gone after 1 year. I think it's really hard to retain players, but I didn't think he would show up in the first place. So I think it's uncharted territory, right? Like, we don't know how this will turn out. I wouldn't say surprised because I watched him, but I thought Beasley would get a little more. It used to be like you bang threes at that level. I think Duncan Robinson was better, but like Davis Bertans, right? Like if you bang threes at a crazy level, 45%, you're getting double digit millions per year over like 4 years. But I think teams are just really stingy now outside of the exceptions. And it's like there's KCP and then there's like everyone else.
Ty, this was great as usual. Are you able just to tell our listeners where they can find you and all the fantastic work that you do?
At Ty Windish on Twitter and Threads, probably posting it both places a little less, and Instagram, doing a little Instagram, did a reel the other day, really getting crazy. But the Eurostep Podcast Network, wherever you listen to or watch this fine podcast for our Bucks content, and then gspn.info if you want even more Wisconsin sports, including some premium stuff, you can check us out there as well.
Ty, thank you so much. As you know by now, we'll be pestering you again in the future, so I will talk to you soon.
I can't wait. I hope the Bucks are a playoff factor so I can try and weasel my way in here in not off-season land, but we'll see. It's been a while now, so fingers crossed, at least for my sake.